welcome to those who are just joining us. We can see everyone filling up the virtual theater here. We'll give everyone maybe a minute or two. A lot of people showing up. So thank you all for being here. We will get started here shortly. Again, to those of you who are just joining us, thank you so much for being here. We're going to give it maybe one more minute as people are continuing to show up here. One thing we can do while we're waiting, as you look in the bottom of your Zoom window there, you've got your little chat tab. If you would let us know where you are dialing in or watching from today. Our panel today is made up of folks from Boston, Massachusetts, Ireland, London, and the Netherlands. So a very wide-ranging group. Would love to see where everyone else is watching from today. More from Ireland, Dubai, nice. Canada, Switzerland, Portugal, wow. Mexico, this is awesome, y'all. Would love to say I can read that fast, but I mean, we are coming from everywhere today. Italy, Paraguay, Iowa, India, more from Portugal, Sweden, Austria, Germany, Chile, Tampa, Florida, nice. I live in Jacksonville, close by. Denmark, Ukraine, Chile, Paris, France, Estonia. This is phenomenal, y'all. We still have people showing up. I'm going to give it about 15 more seconds. If you're just joining us, if you look over in the chat, people are sharing where they're dialing in from today, and it's everywhere. So thank you to everyone from every place that you're here. England, Illinois, Charlotte, great. With that, I think we will get started. Let me get to my screen here. Let's do that. Hello, and welcome everyone to a very exciting webinar that we are very much looking forward to today. A webinar we have titled BIAN and SmartBear, Enabling Open Banking Adoption and FinTech Innovation. My name is Noel Wurst. I'm our Director of Storytelling here at SmartBear. But the real stars of the show are the panel that we have for you today. We'll introduce them in just a moment. We've just got a couple of quick housekeeping duties to go over, which will only take a sec. First, this webinar is being recorded. All registrants will be provided with a recording of today's presentation that we encourage you to rewatch and share with your colleagues after the fact, so look out for that. Next, you'll notice a couple of one-question polls that will pop up throughout the webinar. We always really appreciate everyone for participating in those, if you don't mind, as they really help us better understand the initiatives of our audiences, the challenges that you're facing, and how we can better help you meet those. Also, we will have some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So anytime a question comes to mind, feel free to use that Q&A tab at the bottom. If you will put those there, we'll definitely see those as they come in, and we'll get to as many of those as we can after the fact. For any that we do not get to, we will follow up with you to get those questions answered. The chat tab can be used for chatting, asking logistical questions, things like that. But again, all those Q&A questions that you have for our panelists, please put those there in that Q&A tab. Next slide, please. Thank you. For anyone who is new to learning about SmartBear, this is kind of an overview of our products in our portfolio. You can kind of see that we kind of cover the entire software development, testing, and delivery lifecycle here with a variety of tools. Some you may know, some you may not know. Also some open source technologies like Cucumber and Swagger that are part of this as well. And of course, SwaggerHub, which we'll be focusing on a little bit today. So just wanted to give everyone a quick overview. Next slide. Let's get our panelists introduced. We are joined by our friends at BIAN, Arnab Mitra, who's a program manager, Hans Tesselar, who's an executive director at BIAN, and then my own colleague, Michal Higgins, a senior solutions architect here at SmartBear. Next slide. The agenda today, as you can see here, Michal is going to kick things off, going over standards and governance in the API development lifecycle. He will hand it off to Hans, who will give an introduction as to BIAN, what that group is and does. We'll then go over to Arnab, who will show a model and landscape of how SwaggerHub is used and what they're building there. That will include a live demo, and then we'll get to our Q&A. Next slide. And before we get started, one of those polls, like I mentioned, would love to know which phase of the API lifecycle is your primary focus, wherever you are watching from and working from today. So if you don't mind participating in that, you should see that pop up here in just a sec. Is that poll? There we go. So thank you for your participation in that. And we'll leave that up for a little bit, give you time to take part in that. And while that's up, I will go ahead and hand things over to our panelists to get started. We will start with Mihal. It's yours.
Thank you very much, Noel. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Somebody nod their head. I have stunning news. It's raining in Ireland. Well, I suppose the joke would be if it wasn't. My name is Mihal Higgins, and I'm the Senior Enterprise Solutions Architect at SmartBear for SwaggerHub. I have end-to-end responsibility in the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, for APIs. Arnab, if I could have the next slide, please. This is our third webinar in a series that we have been building for API design in specifically the finance, banking, fintech space. Our first webinar was very, very successful. We had a senior API owner and manager from Swift, a very senior analyst from Forrester, and very successfully talked about the high-level view of standards and governance in API design for banking. We went down the nerd route in our second webinar, which was very much a tactical presentation of how to enable the standards and governance model in the API lifecycle. We have this webinar today, and I call your attention to the fact that we will also be continuing the series. A very important announcement happened yesterday. SmartBear acquired a company called Packflow. Packflow is a company that has been very, very successful in a realm called API contract testing. And with the acquisition of Packflow, we will now be adding a webinar to our series here at a later date on how to do API contract testing for financial APIs. If I could have the next slide, please. So why are we talking about standards and governance? Well, we are in an environment that is changing probably even as we speak. We have seen an incredible uptake of digital transformation in the finance space. It is absolutely true that what we're working towards is an environment where we have enabled scale. So if you look at this slide, we start with what we call providers on the left. So let's say that that's a retail bank. And we then say, okay, there is an explosion of FinTech in the world. And so we call those consumers. And those consumers are being successful because they have end users looking to consume the services they're providing. Now, I don't know if there's many people on this call that are old enough to remember, but I remember when you had a book and you took the book to the bank and you took your paycheck and they wrote your paycheck amount in your book and they stamped it. And that was the effect of standards in those days. Well, that doesn't scale anymore. Literally, we're looking at tens of thousands of banks, hundreds of thousands of fintechs, and of course, billions of end users. So we have a cycle here, and it starts at the top with this idea that a provider wants to focus on providing functionality through APIs. The consumer, of course, is looking to take those APIs and provide a consumer experience to their end users. The end user's expectation, of course, is that I'm going to be able to do this financial transaction and it's going to be secure and protect my personal information. The consumer then, in dealing with the end user, is able to actually take on board the services offered by the provider, which of course is a revenue stream. But in order for this to scale, it has to have standards and governance and regulatory compliance. And sometimes you'll hear me say standards and governance, and when I do, just assume I've also said regulatory compliance. But all of this can't happen without those standards and governance processes. In the old days, you could have bespoke one-off relationships. My local branch, the bank book was blue. And so if you had your blue bank book, you had a relationship with that bank and specifically with that branch of the bank. The closest branch of my bank today is about 5 kilometers from my house, and I don't think I've ever been there. So the digital transformation is rapidly changing the landscape of finance. And in doing so, it has opened the door to the consumption of APIs. So Arnab, if I could have the next slide, please. So why are we talking about standards and governance around APIs? Well, all of these APIs need to be interoperable. You cannot have an individual relationship with each FinTech. And those FinTech providers cannot afford to have individual relationships with their end users. So we need interoperability. We need things that can talk to each other effectively. And to do that, we have to be in a situation where there is a single source of truth for the data that we're moving around. So it's fine that we have communications technology that allows us to talk to anyone pretty much anywhere in the world. But to be interoperable, we have to agree what is the definition of a payee. If you are building an application and you want to be able to do cross-border payments, you will need to define a payee. Guess what? You're not allowed to put favorite color in the payee record. So we have to have a source of truth for payee that can be consumed by APIs, not only within your organization, but across the world. You need to be able to send a payee from one country to another country, from one hemisphere to another hemisphere. And the only way that is going to work is if we have this single source of truth. Number 2, consistency. I need to know that the data I am sending is going to be consistently handled. It's going to work successfully. So rather than using a finance example, I'd like to use a different one. I'm going to go to a rugby match next week in Cardiff. So that means I'm going to need a flight. I'm going to need a hotel. I'm going to need a rent-a-car. I'm going to need tickets to the match. I'm going to need an Uber to pick me up and drop me off from the rugby match because there might be some libations involved. And I would like all of this to culminate at dinner at a fine restaurant. And I would like to do that as fluidly as possible. Can I do it today in a single click? No. Are we moving towards that? Yes, we certainly are. So for fluidity to work, we need to have the standards in place that you have my driver's license and it can be shared to the rent-a-car company. You have my hotel loyalty program, so you can credit my night's stay. All of those things are going to lead to much lower latency in the system. I do not want this transaction set to take hours and hours and hours to execute. So because there is a standard definition for what a driver's license might look like, or what a currency code might look like, or very importantly, if we're involving our friends in America, what a date field might look like. So interoperability, consistency, and fluidity flow very much from standardization, from having single sources of truth for data objects, and for having very tight rules around how those are used. Another example of fluidity, here in Ireland, we have a very strong taxi union. So Uber Transport does not offer services here today. About a month before the pandemic began, Uber announced Uber Eats. And everyone thought this was a wonderful idea. It made very good sense, but it would probably take them at least a year to deliver. Well, it didn't. Why didn't it? Well, because Uber already had an API to go get a car, already had an API to find a location on a map, already had an API to accept payments. So from a fluidity point of view, to transition from Uber Transport to Uber Eats, all they really needed to do is figure out how to get a Big Mac on a mobile phone. So again, with the presence of standardized APIs, they were able to execute much quicker. Now, the bottom bullet is probably the one that most of you would have expected me to start with. And that, of course, is security and regulatory compliance. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be very focused around the BIAN landscape, the BIAN services, service architectures, but regulatory compliance around open banking, GDPR here in Europe, SOX compliance, FHIR is a healthcare standard. There's data classification regulations that are really beginning to apply very, very tightly. So, of course, having a strong program in your enterprise around standards and governance and regulatory compliance will ease the transition into this digital technology, this digital marketplace, and allow you to do so with the confidence that you're maintaining the regulatory compliance that you're under today. Arnab, if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to talk just briefly about how we do this, how we help enable this from SmartBear's perspective. We have a product called SwaggerHub, and SwaggerHub is a design lifecycle tool. It basically enables you to create APIs, to bring on board single sources of truth, to have a collaborative and open environment. Very few large enterprises have all of their designers and developers in a single location anymore. So collaboration is a huge value proposition for us. And as well as being a design tool, SwaggerHub, by acting as a repository in the design first model, the contract first model, you may have heard it called, by being that repository, that source of truth, we then enable partnerships with things outside of SwaggerHub. So yes, it's great. I've designed an API. I now need to test that API. I need to get that API documentation to my consumers. I need to get this into a build process. So SwaggerHub is not just a design tool. We are also a partner with the entire remaining software development lifecycle after API design. So if I could have one more slide, please, Arnab. Thank you. In SwaggerHub, we have worked very hard with an ongoing commitment to standards and governance and enforcement. And so the three key things I'm going to talk about just quickly today are a concept we call domains. Domains are a single source of truth. Developers would call these libraries, code libraries, shared libraries. So that concept translated into the API design cycle is what we call domains. So in a domain, I can place the data definition of payee. Now, all of the APIs in my SwaggerHub can consume that definition directly into their API. No copy paste, no making it up themselves, no adding favorite color to payee. They are consuming that single source of truth. A very good example of another use case is error messages. Across my entire enterprise, I would like consistent error messages. If I force my designers, my API designers, to code the error messages in every single API that they write, even if they're good at copy paste, they're going to make errors. If I put my error messages, my response codes, into a domain and say, every designer, please consume these responses from the domain, then now I have consistent error messages. The second component in SwaggerHub is custom rules. So you'll hear the word style guide a lot. There are style guides from Microsoft, style guides from Azure, style guides from AWS. The enterprise probably will cherry pick and create its own style guide. Having a style guide in a 600-page PDF is lovely, but it's not very useful. When you can take that style guide and make it into a set of rules that are actually enforced in the editor, when I'm in SwaggerHub building an API and I try to use an uppercase path name, well, I have a rule that says path names must be lowercase. I'm going to get immediate feedback. It's going to say this line is in violation of the standard guide. And in fact, I'm going to prevent you from publishing this API until you fix that rule. So having a library of single source of truth and then having custom rules that can guarantee the proper usage of those are incredible possibilities for enforcement. The final one, you heard me talk about partnership. SwaggerHub, as a source of truth for the API contract, says, I'm used to dealing with humans. I have a wonderful user interface and people can write APIs and do all of these things. But after an API leaves SwaggerHub, it can't be on its own. And so what we've done is made sure that we can do programmatically anything that we can do in the user interface. So as a human, I can create an API, I can add to it, I can publish it, I can look at the rule violations on it. Well, we can do all of those things programmatically as well. That means as an API leaves SwaggerHub to begin its journey into the build and deploy process, those engines, typically machines, servers, pipelines, have the ability to speak back to SwaggerHub and say, hey, SwaggerHub, does this version of the API have any rule violations? It should not have rule violations. I'm going to quit. And on and on and on. Are there open comments? Are the payloads correct? Do they match the assertions? Things like that. I tend to call this human governance. So the AI apocalypse has not happened. The human still has a very strong role to play, especially in standards and enforcement. And that's what this is all about. Now, if we could go to my last slide, please. This is the community that we see being built. Along the top of this slide are standards organizations that I've had the privilege to work with to help bring into the SwaggerHub family. Along the bottom of the slide is typically the rest of the world. You'd be hard pressed to find a large community of people that are not using APIs, whether they know it or not. And what we see happening in between them is this idea of shared assets, shared community assets, domains for the single source of truth, APIs themselves, and in some cases, even the custom rules. So if we look at SWIFT, GPI, that's cross-border payment processing, they're providing an API to do that. Isn't that lovely? But within that API are also sources of truth around payee and currency code and date and time and all of those things. So as we're building this community upward, we're doing it based on the standards organizations that are giving us these things like single source of truth, like custom rules, like branding, like badges. I work with IATA, the International Airline Transport Association. If you're an airline and you meet the IATA definitions for open air and API consistency, you'll get a little badge that you can put on your mobile application certified by IATA. This is what standards and governance brings to us in the API end-to-end design lifecycle. And I have now the great privilege to introduce to you the executive director from BIAN, and I will ask Hans to now begin his presentation in terms of BIAN. In the meantime, you can see another poll has popped up, and I would ask you to take a moment to answer that. Hans, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you very, very much, and give people some time to answer the poll. So my name is Hans Tessler. I'm the executive director of the Banking Industry Architectural Network. I already seen a lot of questions in the Q&A and in the chat, so please use the Q&A box because that's where the questions should be, so we can record them and answer them afterwards if you don't have the time today. And if you go to the next slide, you will see BIAN. So BIAN started in 2008. I am with BIAN since 2011. And the mission statement of BIAN is to solve the integration issues of the bank. And integration is what we're talking about. So when we started in 2008, it was primarily on application to application integration. How do I add more functionality to my existing IT landscape? Then halfway, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the focus shifted to APIs. So we are developing APIs. We are making APIs available for the industry. As of today, and Anat will show that later, we have 243 APIs that can be used. Our API environment is open for members and non-members. Everybody can access them. Everybody can download them. We provide them in microservices code and in Swagger notation. So the next step, what we did is to see, can we use those APIs internally? Can we use them to do the integration inside the bank by using the APIs? We all know that we used to do service-oriented architecture. It's now more composable architecture, and composable architecture is more based on linking APIs together. So BIAN is a global community, as you will see on the next slide. So we do have these are the bank members. The question was, is there a paid membership? The answer is yes, there is a paid membership because the members, yeah, let's say, finance our running cost. So you see members from banks from all around the globe, North America, South America, Asia Pacific, Europe. We now also have India and Pakistan in. They are large and small banks. They are well-known and less known banks, but together they bring in a huge amount of banking knowledge because they know how to do banking that we apply in our models and solutions. And when we go to the next slide, you will see our, let's call it ecosystem of what we call partners. So there are the consultancies, the integrators, the solution providers, and so on and so forth. And again, it goes from large Microsoft, IBM, to small, for instance, our friends from Envision, 4 people, and you know how large IBM and Microsoft would be. And again, from all around the globe, we have China, we have Korea, and so on and so forth. So click again on up, and then there. Okay. So, but we also have 5 academic partners. Those academic partners help us to do projects, write white papers. So I just named them: Carnegie Mellon in the United States, Singapore Management University in Singapore, RBT in India, the Competence Center Sourcing in Switzerland, and just recently we have an agreement in place with the University of Leuven in Belgium. They have developed a methodology for event-driven architecture, event-driven design, and we're going to do a joint project for it. Also, a question that I already saw in the Q&A. In the middle part, you see the other standards bodies that are active in the financial services industry. And with all of them listed here, we do have an agreement in place. We can use their materials and they can use our materials. And that helps us to avoid, all parties involved, to reinvent wheels that already exist. So our data model, for instance, is as much as possible aligned with the ISO 20022 standards to help us getting the traction. A lot of people are, let's say, knowledgeable with the ISO standard, so that also eases the adoption. And then on the bottom, we have 2 training partners. So we do have a certification program in place, architect certification program in place, and they can provide additional training service if needed. Anna. So also a question, okay, so what is in it for a member and a non-member? As you can see, a non-member can consume what we are offering. All our materials are royalty-free, but you have read-only rights. You can download PDFs, you can download PowerPoints, but you cannot download the code. You can also attend our introduction days. So now COVID is more or less gone. We're going to re-establish our introduction days that we try to do in each region. You can access as a non-member our developers platform. So there are no restrictions for non-BIAN members. And of course, you can go for BIAN certification. All the others that you can see is being part of the ecosystem, have access to the experts, have access to the peers, starting projects, working in working groups, and so on and so forth. That is a members only option. So if you're not a member yet, don't hesitate. And now I hand over to Anap.
Thank you, Hans, and hope I'm audible. And yeah, so we will move over to the section on the open banking, fintech, collaboration, integration, using the BIAN standards. Okay, so on this slide, we see on the left-hand side, we're talking about open banking. What do these images signify? We're really talking about retail banking, current accounts, payments, things like this. What has been covered by PSD2, CDR in Australia, FDX in the US, and so on. They offer you the ability to, initiate payments, and maybe, and of course, to integrate account data, going, into other fields like mortgages and loans and so on, like if you look at CDR. But when we're looking at open finance, we're really looking at a much broader reach. And this is where, the BIAN standard comes in, because it covers the entire banking landscape. And, BIAN also gives you the framework of what Michal touched upon earlier around interoperability. So, it helps that interoperability from a functional perspective. It gives you the functional partitionings that will let you interoperate. And then you can bring in AI and FinTech and all that to achieve things like, handling a windfall investment request for a wealth management firm, for instance. Just examples, really. So now we look at we spoke about open standards in banking, and while we have things like PSD2, the scope is still quite limited to one part of retail banking. So with BIAN, what you get is a standard that covers the entire banking landscape. And basically what we are trying to do here is move from the left to the right. So we are trying to move from these monolithic architectures in core banking systems, if you like, in the past and still in many places, towards the composable architecture Hans talked about by the introduction of functional partitions, functional building blocks that would become the base of domain-driven designs and things like this. So microservices basically that you see on the right. So in trying to achieve that, what BIAN did is create what we call the service landscape. This is a complex diagram, and there is, it's hard to read, of course, but the idea of this diagram is really a bank on a page. So you see these small little rectangles on this diagram, and each rectangle says something, like this says loan, this says consumer loan, there is one for current account here, there's one for investment portfolio management. So the idea is that these little building blocks, they're mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, MESI. And if you were to put these building blocks together in different orders, in different patterns, you could achieve any functionality that you want to offer within a bank. That's the idea. In any part of banking, be it retail, investment banking, wealth management, whatever. So this is one of our fundamental slides and things to remember. The other point I want to mention up on the top is for each of these building blocks, these what we call service domains, there is an API that BIAN provides, a semantic API, and this is where the whole API story fits in. Now we quickly look at the use case. This is a use case, a very generic use case of corporate customer onboarding. And the idea here is to really show you how you can achieve and what you can achieve with BIAN. So, on the top, you see this from left to right, you see, you need to do a few steps, maybe you need to validate some documents that the customer submits, you need to retrieve the details, you need to do some KYB for a corporate customer, KYC for the related parties and so on, and some credit process and so on. So for each of these, BIAN has one of those building blocks, a service domain. And why use that? Because if you use that, what happens is you partition your application in a way that you can switch in and out systems. You can put in AI where you need it, like credit analytics. You can bring in FinTechs where you need them. So it gives you that composable architecture and low vendor lock-in and so on. So that's the whole point of, or one of the big points of trying to use BIAN. So from that example, we will look at another one, which is similar, but slightly different. So here you have a business scenario. Again, it's initiate corporate customer onboarding, but this is more a real scenario that we have taken from the BIAN model. And you know what a sequence diagram is, you see the connections and so on. But what you will see here, so these yellow boxes are again those building blocks from that complex diagram page. So they're the service domains. And now you see how the yellow boxes are connected to each other. So, you see, for instance, here, you have a connection, if you can see it, is from party lifecycle management to customer credit rating, which says conduct credit process of corporate customer. So that part, conducting the credit process, if you clicked on it, it will eventually lead you to an API endpoint. So the idea, the message, the key message in this slide is to just show you how we have these example business scenarios. They're not prescriptive, they're guidelines and examples really, and how they link to our APIs that we have and that are hosted on SwaggerHub, of course. A bit more on a service domain. So, we spoke about those small building blocks. So just an expansion of what they look like. So here we take the current account, for instance. We all know about current accounts. We use them every day, maybe. There you have the current account has different properties, like it has what we call behavior qualifiers. This is a BIAN term, but what it means is kind of like features. It has things like account sweeps. It has got deposits and withdrawals, things like the service fees and so on. And then we have service operations, which are basically nothing but endpoints in API speak. So each service operation we have would lead to an endpoint. And when you're writing code, it would translate to a function, a method, whatever, things like this. So that is kind of how our BIAN model building blocks, the service domain, the key building block, links to an API in our portal. Here we see a lot of other BIAN artifacts. So, we spoke about the service domain, we spoke about the APIs, we spoke about these example scenarios. We also have something called wireframes, which is a collection of scenarios and how these different functional building blocks could interact with each other in different scenarios. And then we have a business object model, which is a richer data set from where, we try to enrich these service domain models. Okay, so now off to the BIAN portal to show you how you could navigate around and really see things in real life. So the address is here, portal.bian.org. And if I stop sharing and just try to share my desktop so you can see the website. So yeah, so we're on portal.bian.org, and here you see we have the semantic API portal. So in our semantic API portals, as we said, each API is equivalent to a BIAN building block, the service domain. So we have all these service domains here, and you see the functional names in account recovery, account reconciliation, things like this. And if you clicked on a service domain, you will see some data on them, examples of use, all the business context, the banking context. You will see some business scenarios, like account recovery, where they can be used to process requests for account block, things like this. And also, obviously, you can see the API. And, this, as you obviously can see, that is hosted in SwaggerHub. And, it has all the functionalities that SwaggerHub offers. You have things like try it out, with some sample data. And then, you can export it, create your client SDKs, whatever platform you are using, Swift for Apple apps, whatever, server stubs in different ASP.NET Core, Go server, and so on. So you have all that functionality with our APIs hosted on SwaggerHub. So now I will again stop sharing and go back to my presentation, if I can find it. Okay, so we looked at our building blocks, the service domain, the functional building blocks, and the equivalent APIs. And now we will look at our model APIs. So what are these model APIs? Next slide. They are basically the different artifacts we showed you. We have got service domains, we have got semantic APIs, we have got business scenarios, the bombs. And these APIs are to access the artifacts themselves. And why do that? You do that because then you could integrate the BIAN model in different tools you might use. You might use enterprise architecture tools, you might use development tools. We already have, people integrated into Apache products, people integrate into their own tool set they're building, so that they have the BIAN model without any human interaction. So that's what we're trying to do. Of course, with using these APIs, you have got, all of that sandbox, live environment on SwaggerHub. You've got help pages, Postman collections, and all of that. So now we will do another little demo of how these APIs can be called. So again, I have to switch from here, go to my desktop, and let's have a look. So if I can find it. So yeah, so this is how SwaggerHub, our APIs look. And here you see the service domains, the unique building blocks we talked about, and we are now looking at pretty much code. So now we will look at some data that it returns. All our APIs are classified by releases. So you see BIAN version 10 from last year. These are sandbox environments. So we can have other banks publishing APIs, Bank C version 10, and so on. And also, what you can then do is, if you go to the service domains, for example, you can do, a service domain by name, for example, and you can do it with the UID and all sorts of things like that. So, if I do current account, just as an example, I can show you, it should come back. This is a sandbox environment. At times it takes time, but it should come back. Now, let us quickly, I know there's some testing going on, so that's not great, but it should come back. But anyway, let's go to another part of it so we don't waste time. Yeah, okay. So we have a bit of a problem because it's quite a large data set. Okay, it has come back, in fact. Yeah, okay, just in time. So as you can see, it's a huge data set. So we have, of course, a current account is a big functional unit, and we have lots of data in it, lots of name, lots of fields, and all of that. But anyways, that's the idea of it. Now, the other small bits and pieces that I was going to show you was okay. So we talked about these APIs, and I showed you how these APIs can be called. But obviously, once you call these APIs, what can you do? So, you can, for instance, like we have got some apps for our users. You can see all these service domains, for example, here. And, here you can select current account. And then this is also calling those APIs. You can actually see all the view of that data. We spoke about service operations, their input attributes. These are basically endpoints. And our behavior qualifiers, the features, their attributes, and their descriptions and so on. So you can build applications like this, and this is why we expose the APIs. But of course, anyone can build it. Also, with these APIs, we looked at the business scenarios, and you saw a sequence diagram. But look, when we have put the data into the database and is accessible by APIs, you can build whatever you like. So, we have built a React app here, which shows you, sequence diagrams in a different way. You can see here, this is a process card clearing by card network. And, you can see the links, you can see what the operation is, between card clearing and credit card transactions, update transactions for consolidation and distribution and things like this. So you can, the idea of showing this is you can build a lot of rich things with these kind of APIs. And, many of our members have started doing that, including JP Morgan Chase, we know, and also IBM are doing some work around this. Okay, so I will stop sharing once again, go back to my slides. If I can find them. I can. Okay, so this is just a slide on what we saw. DevOps and open source. Now, whatever I showed you in terms of these data, these APIs, we have a fully integrated, fully automated CI/CD pipeline within BIAN. BIAN is a small organization, so everything needs to be automated because we don't have people to do it by hand. So what we do is we take all our data you saw is in a tool called BizDesign, an enterprise architecture tool that goes into MongoDB. Then we have microservices that push it into SwaggerHub, where you saw it, and Michal touched upon this before, where SwaggerHub has the APIs to push it into SwaggerHub. We don't need human beings to do it. We push it into our portal, we push it into GitHub, we have a GitHub repository, and then of course we expose REST APIs to access this data itself that we showed you. As I said, there are other tools, external tools, the message modeler is one, which is using this data and giving us feedback. And then, we also have governance in our approval app, where you can compare artifacts. I actually showed you that, and I'll show you another screenshot of it. And, you can look at how well any feedback that comes from the external community compares with the BIAN standard, then approve it or ask for rework and things like that. So we built the entire, CI/CD pipeline of pushing out artifacts and bringing it back into BIAN. And of course, at many critical stages where there are APIs involved, we have SwaggerHub in there. Now, you saw some of the UI that we are looking at. We spoke about the approval app, where we take a BIAN building block, a service domain, and then from the message modeler, we get API feedback from users. We compare them, and then we say it's okay, or maybe needs rework, and so on. That will soon expand to other things like certification. So certification of feedback that comes in, and, of solutions that tech providers build. A comparer app where you can take, something from Bank A maybe and something from Tech A, a solution, and see how well they fit. again, also on the API side, but also on business objects and business scenarios, so on. And then you have the model browser where you can, look at these business scenarios, the BIAN data, the APIs, and so on. So these things are in the pipeline from the second onwards, and these things will appear throughout the year. Another final view of what the BIAN tech offerings are. So when we look at this slide, pretty much everything beyond biz design came in from 2020, start of 2020. So we have built all of these over the last 1.5 years. All these apps are coming in, and whatever we provide as apps to user for for human consumption, we also provide via APIs. It's hosted on SwaggerHub, where you can call our data, get our data, post to our data, and so on. And with that, we are on to the poll, and back to Noel.
Thank you very much, Arnav. Got the poll here. Thank you, everyone, for taking part in that and for the presentations that you all gave there. A lot of great questions have come in the Q&A. We've been kind of looking at these in the background and determining which ones we want to definitely try and get covered here. We've got some time here at the end, so I'm going to go ahead and go right into it while you take care of those questions. Let me get back to here. One of the questions that came in from someone was, where can I get the BIAN OAS? Is it available on Swagger? Anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, it's all available at portal.bian.org. And we can get back to you as well, I guess, after the meeting in an email. But yeah, it's all available at portal.bian.org.
Someone else has asked, does SwaggerHub have industry-specific archetypes? If so, what is the financial services framework based on?
Oh, I'll take that.
Okay.
SwaggerHub obviously is an agnostic tool. It's an editor design platform for OAS APIs today, async APIs tomorrow, and on and on. So it maintains a fairly industry agnostic view. However, the components brought into SwaggerHub by an individual organization can be very much formed around an archetype. So IATA, a very good example. I mean, I'll do BIAN as well, but IATA has created a series of domains. And so those domains can be imported into SwaggerHub, and now you're an airline. Obviously, Arnav and Hans and BIAN have made a very strong commitment to the API mindset and the OAS RESTful API model, and are providing their archetype, if you will, in SwaggerHub as well.
Thank you. Next one here, I think this might be for our friends here at BIAN. What is BIAN's direction for industries adopting blockchain? Is there a standard for blockchain yet, and is there an API design around it?
Well, the answer is no. So there is no API yet. So the way that some of our members look at blockchain, they see blockchain as an additional channel. So within the bank, you need to construct the payment, you need to approve the payment, and then you have to, let's say, transmit the payment. So that could be through SWIFT, it could be whatever. There are a lot of questions about the different forms, and it could be blockchain. So for us today, and there is no other demand yet from members, it is an additional channel.
Another one here that has come in is, we are looking at wrapping legacy systems with BIAN building blocks. Is this something you are familiar with?
Well, the answer is yes, because that's what we see often. So what the steps are is that you look at your legacy that you want to wrap. You plot to the BIAN service domains that are served by the legacy system. And then you can define, based on the scenarios that Arnav showed, what should be then the interaction between the wrapped part and the additional part. So there are some examples, and we can also provide a case study where it's demonstrated.
It's here.
Noel?
Mihal, maybe. Yes.
I see a question around SwaggerHub and digital machine learning. I'd like to
That's
take
what I was
that
about
one
to ask
on.
you. That was my next one.
Very good. SwaggerHub's model today is around shared code domains, and the idea that we can incorporate a domain that is written within the enterprise, a domain that's written by just a specific application within the enterprise. So I might have a domain that has error codes. I might have a domain that has error codes unique to selling books. And then I might bring in a domain from ISO or from IATA or from BIAN describing specific data structures. Linking that more effectively to things like data as a service and things like that are certainly roadmap items, but machine learning is very complex in terms of API design. So there is nothing on the immediate horizon there. But with the provisions we already have in terms of supporting domains being very dynamic, just like an API can be versioned, a domain can be versioned. I think we open a lot of the doors you're looking for. But in terms of direct connectivity to some sort of machine learning management system for dynamic definitions of static data, no, we won't be there for quite some time, I would say.
There's some great questions in here. Here's one that has interested me. It says, would it be fair to say that BIAN can be applied to not just APIs and services, but potentially to data warehouse type semantic models?
Yeah, well, yeah, the answer is yes, but so we more like I said, we would like to say don't move data around, just interact with the data. So let's say data warehouse seems a little bit like an old-fashioned approach. So if you have the data that you can access through microservices or to APIs internally, then the question is, why should you consolidate it in one place with all the versioning around it? So the answer is yes, but I think you have to rethink your strategy.
Okay. I want to tackle one on security, since security is always of interest in the API world. Someone has asked, are there any security suggestions for all the consumers of these standards?
From a BIAN point of view, you know, we are more a functional standard, so we don't generally, you know, do a particular recommendation around security, because that's for us a bit more implementation level. But you know, whatever security standard you use is good. We are providing more the functional side of the standard. I think, yeah, it might be more a question from Mihal. I don't know if
Noel, would you read the question again, please?
I'm trying to see if it's in my answered section here. One second. It was someone was asking. They were asking about security, but I'm trying to find it here. But it was basically just asking, do you have any suggestions around security for people who are for consumers who are adopting these standards? Being mindful, they had something on there about being mindful about, you know, hackers and just keeping something as secure and private as financial info private.
Okay, so from a general API point of view, this isn't even specific to the financial marketplace, but from specifically the API design point of view, obviously our first recommendation is that all the endpoints be accessed using TLS, that is to say HTTPS. The OAS Open API model supports a wide variety of authentication mechanisms for APIs, ranging from token-based, user password-based, OAuth-based. So security is a key component. You must describe the security relationship between an endpoint and the authentication mechanism to describe it. Obviously, our recommendations is always to expose any API endpoint as HTTPS, that is to say secure TLS-based. Specifically around financial, no. We're agnostic to industry. So if there is a security model defined by BIAN, defined by open banking, ISO 20022, defined by whomever, what we will work with is the ability to try and implement that correctly in the API design model.
Okay. We are at the top of the hour. We are going to stick around for a few more minutes to get a couple more of these questions answered. One thing I did want to ask for our BIAN folks here, we've had a couple of people ask about getting links to some of the resources and examples you've provided. Someone asking for whom are the BIAN materials available. Could you talk about maybe some of where what was shared today can be looked into further by our attendees?
So first of all, let's say the BIAN materials are, as I showed in my presentation, are available in the read-only mode for non-members, and that's you can find it easily at BIAN.org. That's where you and Anap can, and he already mentioned it, the place where you can find all the APIs. Anap, can you repeat it again?
Yeah, it is portal, so portal.bian.org.
Okay. Yeah, that answers the question.
Great. One more I'm going to try and squeeze in here. I'm not sure if they're asking about within BIAN or SwaggerHub. Maybe you can both kind of answer it. Can you elaborate on what level of analytics data is possible to visualize for consumers?
Well, let me take it very quickly from the SwaggerHub side. SwaggerHub is not an operational gateway. We have very tight integration capability between SwaggerHub and the commercial gateways, Apigee, AWS Lambda, Azure APIM. But we do not actually act as an intermediary or a proxy for operational API execution. So we do not have analytics to provide.
Similar for us. So we're providing an canonical model.
Great. Well, with that, I do need to get things wrapped up. There are a number of questions in here that we will try and get answers sent to you personally after the fact, so we are able to save these questions. So thanks to everyone for asking those. I want to thank our guests today for being a part of this. Hans and Arnab, thank you so much. The audience and the range of countries that everyone was dialing in from today, I think, is evidence of great interest in what you both presented. So thank you for sharing with that. Or thank you for sharing that with everyone. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone, you all will receive a recorded copy of today's presentation for your on-demand viewing pleasure and for sharing with your colleagues. You can also check out a full library of all of our past presentations. Some of you asked for links to our previous 2 FinTech themed webinars. We put that there in the chat so you can grab those. And at smartbear.com, you can also see other webinars, upcoming events, and other content that we have available there. We'll absolutely be presenting more of these in the future. Thank you again so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.